Hello everyone and welcome to my presentation on Italy, the Roman Empire, Vatican City, and San Marino. My name is William Cooper and I'm the grandson of Frida Cooper, who's an Amica resident that passed away on July 7th of last year. I miss her, but I'm making my monthly presentations at Amica in her honor. We're continuing our travels to Afro-Eurasia, which covers 57% of the world's land area, but has 86% of its population. We began in the Middle East, then we went to Southern Asia, Southeast Asia, Central Asia, East Asia, North Asia and Eastern Europe, and last month we completed our travels to Eastern Europe, and today we begin our visit to Western Europe. Next month we're continuing our travels to Western Europe, and I hope to see you on the 28th of September when we visit Germany, Austria, and Hungary. Before we start, the world is vast with 200 countries, 700 languages, and 4,000 faiths. On the other hand, many countries share a history of colonization, conflicts, and treaties designed to solve their problems, but that often created new ones. Today's presentation on Italy features 4 important Italians: Julius Caesar, Leonardo da Vinci, Christopher Columbus, and Benito Mussolini. We will learn about their accomplishments and significance over the course of Italy's history. Let's begin. Today's presentation has 7 sections. Pre-Rome. Before Rome, there was a Bronze Age in Italy where ancient settlements were established. After that, the Etruscans arrived from Anatolia and became a major Mediterranean trading power. City of Rome. According to legends, Rome was founded by 2 brothers, Romulus and Remus. However, in an argument about who would rule the city or about where the city would be, Romulus killed Remus and named the city after himself. Romulus, Rome. Section 3, Roman Republic. After centuries of monarchy, a group of noblemen replaced the monarchy with elected officials, known as magistrates. Initially, only the wealthiest held power, but after 200 years of struggle and protest, peasants gained political power. The Punic Wars were a series of 3 conflicts between Rome and Carthage. If we look at a map, we can see Carthage in the light purple and Rome in the red. And we can see that Carthage controlled the top of North Africa, part of Sicily, Sardinia, and even part of the Iberian Peninsula. So the 3 conflicts, Rome won all 3 of them. The first one began after Rome seized Sicily and besieged Carthage. The second began when Rome declared war after Carthage took Iberia. And the final one began when Rome declared war on Carthage for invading Numidia, which was the southern part of northern Africa. Rome won all 3 and then replaced Carthage as the major power in the region, taking control of all their territory. Julius Caesar was known as the god of the Roman Empire, as he conducted the first Roman invasion of Britain, and he created a series of extensive reforms. Let's watch this video to see how he got his power, how he used his power, and how his power led to his assassination.
What would you do if you thought your country was on the path to tyranny? If you saw one man gain too much power, would you try to stop him? Even if that man was one of your closest friends and allies? These were the questions haunting Roman Senator Marcus Junius Brutus in 44 BCE, the year Julius Caesar would be assassinated. Opposing unchecked power wasn't just a political matter for Brutus, it was a personal one. He claimed descent from Lucius Junius Brutus, who had helped overthrow the tyrannical king known as Tarquin the Proud. Instead of seizing power himself, the elder Brutus led the people in a rousing oath to never again allow a king to rule. Rome became a republic based on the principle that no one man should hold too much power. Now, 4.5 centuries later, this principle was threatened. Julius Caesar's rise to the powerful position of consul had been dramatic. Years of military triumphs had made him the wealthiest man in Rome, and after defeating his rival Pompey the Great in a bitter civil war, his power was at its peak. His victories and initiatives, such as distributing lands to the poor, had made him popular with the public, and many senators vied for his favor by showering him with honors. Statues were built, temples were dedicated, and a whole month was renamed, still called July today. More importantly, the title of dictator, meant to grant temporary emergency powers in wartime, had been bestowed upon Caesar several times in succession, and in 44 BCE, he was made dictator perpetuo, dictator for a potentially unlimited term. All of this was too much for the senators who feared a return to the monarchy their ancestors had fought to abolish, as well as those whose own power and ambition were impeded by Caesar's rule. A group of conspirators calling themselves the Liberators began to secretly discuss plans for assassination. Leading them were the senator Gaius Cassius Longinus and his friend and brother-in-law, Brutus. Joining the conspiracy was not an easy choice for Brutus. Even though Brutus had sided with Pompey in the ill-fated civil war, Caesar had personally intervened to save his life, not only pardoning him, but even accepting him as a close advisor and elevating him to important posts. Brutus was hesitant to conspire against the man who had treated him like a son, but in the end, Cassius's insistence and Brutus's own fear of Caesar's ambitions won out. The moment they had been waiting for came on March 15th. At a Senate meeting held shortly before Caesar was to depart on his next military campaign, as many as 60 conspirators surrounded him, unsheathing daggers from their togas and stabbing at him from all sides. As the story goes, Caesar struggled fiercely until he saw Brutus. Despite the famous line "Et tu, Brute," written by Shakespeare, we don't know Caesar's actual dying words. Some ancient sources claim he said nothing, while others record the phrase, "And you, child?" fueling speculation that Brutus may have actually been Caesar's illegitimate son. But all agree that when Caesar saw Brutus among his attackers, he covered his face and gave up the fight, falling to the ground after being stabbed 23 times. Unfortunately for Brutus, he and the other conspirators had underestimated Caesar's popularity among the Roman public, many of whom saw him as an effective leader, and the Senate as a corrupt aristocracy. Within moments of Caesar's assassination, Rome was in a state of panic. Most of the other senators had fled, while the assassins barricaded themselves on the Capitoline Hill. Mark Antony, Caesar's friend and co-consul, was swift to seize the upper hand, delivering a passionate speech at Caesar's funeral days later that whipped the crowd into a frenzy of grief and anger. As a result, the liberators were forced out of Rome. The ensuing power vacuum led to a series of civil wars, during which Brutus, facing certain defeat, took his own life. Ironically, the ultimate result would be the opposite of what the conspirators had hoped to accomplish: the end of the Republic and the concentration of power under the office of emperor. Opinions over the assassination of Caesar were divided from the start, and have remained so. As for Brutus himself, few historical figures have inspired such a conflicting legacy. In Dante's Inferno, he was placed in the very center of hell and eternally chewed by Satan himself for his crime of betrayal. But Swift's Gulliver's Travels described him as one of the most virtuous and benevolent people to have lived. The interpretation of Brutus as either a selfless fighter against dictatorship or an opportunistic traitor has shifted with the tides of history and politics. But even today, over 2,000 years later, questions about the price of liberty, the conflict between personal loyalties and universal ideals, and unintended consequences remain more relevant than ever.
Section 4, Roman Empire. So here we have a map of the Roman Empire in red in 117 AD at its greatest extent. And we can see that it conquered part of England, France, the Iberian Peninsula, Italy, the Balkans, and even stretching as far as Armenia. So after Julius Caesar was killed, eventually Augustus Caesar, his adoptive son, transitioned the republic into an empire with himself at the top, as he set up an autocracy, creating a long-lasting impact on internal political and economic systems. However, the good of this was that he put in several important structures that allowed Rome to develop consistent trade with India and China, leading to increased material wealth. In 79 AD, the disastrous Pompeii incident happened after Mount Vesuvius erupted, releasing 100,000 times the amount of thermal energy than the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, destroying many Roman settlements. A year later, the Colosseum was built, having a length of almost 200 meters, a width of 160 meters, and a height of almost 50 meters, and a surface area of over 6 acres. It's famous for having held thousands of combats between gladiators and contests between men and animals. Emperor Trajan was another of Rome's key leaders, as he expanded the empire to become larger than ever before. His reign ended in 117 after he had conquered Romania, Arabia, Armenia, and Mesopotamia, making the empire larger than ever before. So a map that we saw in 117 AD, that massive scale was because of him. In 395 AD, the Romans decided that their empire was too big to be ruled by one leader, so it was split into the Western and Eastern Roman Empire. Since last month we talked a lot about the Eastern Roman Empire, today we'll focus on the West, as Italy was part of the Western Roman Empire. In 410, the Visigoths, a Germanic group, sacked Western Rome, and this was a key landmark in the fall of the Western Roman Empire. This was incredibly shocking, as it was the first time in over 800 years that Rome had fallen to a foreign enemy. And although Rome was no longer the capital of the empire, it was still the spiritual center, so the damage was felt everywhere throughout the empire. Fall of Rome. So after the Visigoth sacking of Rome, Rome was in a very weak spot, giving the German chief Odoacer the perfect opportunity to invade. And invade he did. He took control of the empire, and he led it until he was deposed by the Ostrogoths, another Germanic group, in 488, and they held it for several centuries. Section 5, Post-Roman Empire. So after the fall of the Roman Empire, the Ostrogoths then took it. But then the Lombards then conquered Italy, and they were another Germanic tribe. They were able to migrate into the region while fighting the Byzantines, so they gave them the perfect position to annex northern Italy. In 773, the Franks, under the leadership of Charlemagne, invaded and conquered the Lombard kingdom, and they ruled it until 800 as part of the kingdom of the Franks. However, they didn't lose it in 800, it was just that Charlemagne was crowned leader of the Holy Roman Empire by the Pope, so Italy was now part of the Holy Roman Empire. In the 1200s, city-states began to develop, including Pisa, Genoa, and Venice, as they became so wealthy and powerful enough that they could create their own independent governments. In 1495, French King Charles VIII invaded after King Ferdinand I of Naples died and was succeeded by his son Alfonso. The issue is that Charles believed that he had a claim to Naples, and thus he captured Naples and became king. But because of the cooperation of the League of Venice, which included several Italian states, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire, he was pushed back and the French army was defeated. So Naples was safe and Alfonso became leader. The Renaissance was a key period of Italian history and culture. The word Renaissance means renaissance, or a rebirth, as was the revival of scholarship and art following a prolonged period of classical stagnation. So this period included the discovery of the Americas by Christopher Columbus, who, although he discovered it on behalf of Spain, he was actually Italian, and also saw advancements in astronomy and the applications of printing and gunpowder. So it was a key moment in Italian history. Now we have the Mona Lisa, which was painted 200 years later in 1503 by Leonardo da Vinci, who is known as the Renaissance man. Today it's the world's most famous painting, and it now hangs in the Louvre Museum in Paris after being stolen. Its mysterious smile and unproven identity has made it the subject of ongoing investigation and fascination, because nobody knows exactly who is in the picture. Let's watch this video about Leonardo da Vinci.
Mystic smile.
The Mona Lisa, The Last Supper, The Vitruvian Man. Just a few of the iconic works that made Leonardo da Vinci one of the most famous artists in history. But da Vinci was also a scientist, architect, sculptor, musician, engineer, and inventor who once said, "The knowledge of all things is possible." His boundless curiosity and achievements are the reasons da Vinci is still recognized as the ideal Renaissance man. Leonardo da Vinci was born an illegitimate child in the province of Vinci, Italy, on April 15, 1452. At 15, he apprenticed under the famous painter Verrocchio in Florence. There, he refined his skills and adapted his trademark sfumato, or smoky technique, which avoids harsh outlines. This technique gives da Vinci's paintings a unique depth. Eventually, he surpassed Verrocchio himself, who allegedly vowed never to pick up a paintbrush again after teaching the young Leonardo. In 1482, da Vinci became a professional painter in Milan. He completed The Virgin of the Rocks and The Last Supper shortly after his arrival. For The Last Supper, da Vinci used a new Renaissance technique called perspective that brought new realism to paintings by making distant objects smaller than those closest to the viewer. Da Vinci draws the viewer's eye to the space above Jesus, which gives it the illusion of great space and depth. During his 17 years in Milan, da Vinci finished only 6 paintings. Instead, he focused on various scientific studies. Da Vinci said, "Learning never exhausts the mind." He kept track of his ideas with meticulous illustrations and entries in a series of notebooks. These notebooks revealed da Vinci's true genius. Da Vinci drew plans for everything from churches and fortresses to water systems and bridges. For the Duke of Milan, he designed advanced weapons, including a tank and machine gun. Da Vinci's fascination with flight produced sketches for flying machines centuries before the first airplane was built. Da Vinci's interest in human anatomy was expressed in the Vitruvian Man, a drawing that explains the proportions of the human body. His study of anatomy brought a gripping realism to his paintings, especially the Mona Lisa, or La Gioconda, the Laughing One, which he finished around 1507. Fellow Renaissance painter Giorgio Vasari said that the Mona Lisa's smile was so pleasing that it seemed divine rather than human, and those who saw it were amazed to find that it was as alive as the original. Da Vinci's fame never subsided, even after his death in 1519. Crowds still wait in line to see the Mona Lisa at the Louvre Museum in France, just as writers, scientists, and historians continue to study his works and marvel at his genius. Da Vinci's advice for the development of a complete mind was study the science of art. Study the art of science. Develop your senses, especially learn how to see. Realize that everything connects to everything else. He did not see a divide between art and science, and was perhaps one of the most diversely talented people who ever lived. It is for this reason that many call Leonardo da Vinci the first Renaissance man.
The sack of Rome of 1527 is another key event in Italy's history, as the Spanish, German, and Holy Roman Empire troops of Charles V attacked Rome, while the Papal States, France, and several other Italian city-states pushed back. Although Charles was just too powerful, and by 1527 nearly half of the city's population was dead. In 1530, the Congress of Bologna marked the enactment of peace and the coronation of Charles V as leader of the Holy Roman Empire. From 1796 to 1797, there were the Napoleonic invasions of Italy as a campaign part of the War of the First Coalition. And this led to Austria and Piedmont's defeat and French control of northern Italy. Initially, everybody thought that Napoleon's conflicts would mostly be a sideshow, as most of the fighting in the war happened in Belgium and in Germany. However, Napoleon mesmerized Europe as he beat every army sent against him. Afterwards, he returned to Nice, France, to train his dwindling army. But 5 days before he was ready to re-attack, he was told there were over 50,000 troops ready to storm in. So he knew that he had to get ready very quickly. But he was actually very lucky because the Piedmontese disrupted the Austrians and vice versa. So he was able to use his unique strategy of divide and conquer to split them up in two and beat them on their own. So he took control of Milan and he crowned himself king of the newly declared Kingdom of Italy. Unification is another key period in Italy's history, as before the peninsula was just several Italian city-states, but now it would be one country. Let's watch this video about how it all happened.
Ever since the fall of Rome, Italy was divided between lots of independent states, each with their own unique cultures, customs, forms of government, and even languages. For over 1,000 years, each state went its own way. Some built trade empires that extended across the Mediterranean. Many were dominated by foreign powers, and one was even ruled by the Pope. But there was no real call for Italian unification. People viewed themselves as Genoese, or Venetian, or Neapolitan, not Italian. Not yet. After the re-establishment of Europe's borders following the Napoleonic Wars, the largest part of Italy was under the control of the autocratic Bourbon dynasty, who ruled the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies in the south. The centre was made up of the Papal States, ruled by the Pope, while the Austrian Empire controlled much of the north, including the cities of Venice and Milan, and they held influence over several smaller client states in Tuscany. Finally, there was the Kingdom of Piedmont-Sardinia, which controlled Sardinia and northwest Italy. That all began to change in the year 1848, when all across Europe, from France to Austria to Poland, liberal revolts broke out with the goal of establishing independent nation-states. In Italy, 1848 was the year when unification began. Sicilians revolted against Bourbon rule. Revolutionaries under the leadership of Giuseppe Mazzini and Giuseppe Garibaldi established the Republic of Rome in the Papal States. Austria's Tuscan client states wrestled control away from the empire and aligned themselves with Piedmont-Sardinia, and the rebels took to the streets in Venice and Milan. This, the first war of Italian independence, did not go well. The Austrians counterattacked in the north and retook their lost territory, even forcing the king of Piedmont-Sardinia, who had supported the rebels, to abdicate. In the south, Bourbon troops quickly put down the Sicilian Revolution, and in the Papal States, soldiers from Napoleon III's French Empire pushed Mazzini and Garibaldi out of Rome, strangling their young republic and restoring the Pope's temporal authority. The war did make a couple of things clear, though. For one, the Kingdom of Piedmont-Sardinia became the front-runner to be leader of a united Italy, mostly because they were the only independent Italian state that actually wanted that to happen. For another, in order to take on Austria especially, they needed a powerful ally. So, in 1853, Piedmont-Sardinia's new king, Victor Emmanuel II, and his prime minister, the Count of Cavour, sent soldiers to assist Britain and France in the Crimean War, in the hopes that one of them would help the Italian cause. And one did. Napoleon III was eager to emulate the achievements of his uncle, and he saw pushing Austria out of Italy both as a way of increasing France's prestige and of growing her power in mainland Europe. It also helped that an Italian revolutionary had nearly killed Napoleon III in January of 1858, and he wasn't overly eager for that to happen again. Secret negotiations between Napoleon III and Cavour resulted in a Franco-Piedmontese military alliance, an agreement to work together to push Austria out of Italy, and to split the region into French and Piedmontese spheres of influence. So, Piedmont-Sardinia and France began to prepare for war with Austria, but the Austrians, seeing what was about to happen, struck first and invaded Piedmont. They nearly reached the capital, Turin, before French troops arrived, and the two nations forced back the Austrians and invaded their holdings in Italy. Soon, peace was reached, but it left pretty much no one happy. Austria lost about half of her territory in northern Italy, including Milan, to the Piedmontese, while her Tuscan client states revolted, briefly formed their own country, and then unified with Piedmont-Sardinia. They weren't happy either, though, as the French had refused to push farther into Austria and allow them to take Venice. To top it all off, Napoleon III wasn't happy, as his goal of creating a French sphere of influence in Italy was destroyed as more and more Italians flocked to the Piedmontese banner. He did get a consolation prize, though. Cavour handed over the county of Nice and Savoy, the ancestral home of Piedmont-Sardinia's kings, to France in exchange for further support. This ended the revolutionary Giuseppe Garibaldi, who was from Nice and was understandably horrified to have his homeland ceded to France. Nevertheless, he was loyal to the idea of a united Italy, and recognized Victor Emmanuel II and Cavour as its likely leaders, so he raised a group of young Italian volunteers called Red Shirts and invaded Sicily. He quickly took over the rest of the Bourbon kingdom, and despite his own desire for an Italian republic, handed over control of the land to Cavour and the king. By this point, Piedmont-Sardinia controlled most of Italy, and to reflect that, it changed its name to the Kingdom of Italy in 1861, with Cavour as its first prime minister. But the new country still lacked two very important cities. Austrian-held Venice and Papal Rome. So Italy made a new alliance, this time with Prussia, and together they invaded Austria in 1866. Italy performed terribly, but Prussia performed well, so Italy still got Venice. Although, the Austrians insisted on handing it over to France first, because they thought Italy hadn't properly earned it. 4 years later, Prussia invaded France in the Franco-Prussian War, and Napoleon III had to pull his troops that had crushed the Roman Republic a decade earlier out of the Papal States. Italy took their absence as an invitation to invade, and Rome was declared the capital of a fully united Kingdom of Italy in 1871. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more just like
Section 6, Kingdom of Italy. Pre-World War I. So as we all know, the Balkan Wars were a precursor and cause to World War I. One reason behind them was the Italian victory against the Ottoman Empire in Libya, which proved to the Balkan nations that the Ottomans were weak, so they decided to invade. And as we also know, there were 6 main causes to World War I. European expansionism, Serbs wanting independence, Franz Ferdinand's assassination, interlocking alliances, Germany's full support of Austria, and the German government and population support of participating in the war. Now let's watch this other video about Italy in the World Wars and also about Benito Mussolini.
1915, and Italy has just joined the First World War. It sided with the Entente powers despite previously having made a defensive pact with the Central powers. Because it was Austria-Hungary that invaded Serbia in 1914, that meant that it wasn't a defensive war, and thus Italy could sit it out. Both sides had tried to convince Italy to join them, and it was the Entente who won out in the end when Italy signed the Treaty of London, which promised them all of this territory from Austria-Hungary as well as a mountain of cash. On May the 23rd, Italy declared war on the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Italy was all in. Italy didn't exactly perform very well during the war, but fortunately their main opponent was Austria-Hungary, who also didn't perform very well. In late 1917 came Italy's greatest defeat during the war, the Battle of Caporetto. This saw the Central Powers push this far into Italy, thus threatening Venice and also seeing 300,000 Italian casualties. In order to raise morale, the Liberal government promised soldiers loads of things like the vote and free land. Anyway, Austro-Hungarian successes in the war, just like in everything else, didn't last. In November 1918, the Battle of Vittorio Veneto began, which saw the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian army and the end of the war in the Italian front. A week after this victory, the First World War was over, and Italy was free to celebrate and gain the lands the Allies had promised them, or at least they'd hoped. During the Paris Peace Conference, the Italians demanded what they had been promised plus a little bit more. The Allies said no and instead gave these areas to Italy and the rest of the promised territories to the new Kingdom of Yugoslavia. Many Italians felt that this was a gross betrayal by the rest of the Entente, and this became known as the Vittoria Mutilata, the mutilated victory. The displeasure at the post-war settlement came to a head when Gabriele D'Annunzio led a group of armed Italian nationalists to the city of Fiume and occupied it. They wanted Italy to annex it, but the government refused. As such, it was declared to be a free state, but after the Italian navy blockaded the city, D'Annunzio surrendered. To make matters worse, the post-war economy was in ruins, and since all of the soldiers had been demobilised and many of the wartime factories were closed, unemployment skyrocketed. Also, the promise of land to the soldiers wasn't honoured, but they did get the vote. All of this disappointment surrounding the outcome of the war, combined with the economic downturn, meant that people became much more extreme in their demands. This led to what's known as the Red Biennium, which saw 2 years of increased support for socialist parties, greater industrial action, some of which was quite violent, and even calls for revolution like that in Russia. These more radical socialists were quite frightening to many Italians, and to prevent them from gaining power, some turned to a new group, the fascists, led by a certain Benito Mussolini. Mussolini had previously himself been a socialist, but he was kicked out of the party when he supported Italian entry into World War I. After the war, many unemployed veterans joined the Black Shirts, a fascist militia who went up and down the country making life pretty miserable for any and all socialists they could find. Mussolini wasn't in complete control of the Black Shirts though. Regional leaders like Italo Balbo had immense sway, but did largely accept Mussolini's leadership. The current Prime Minister of Italy at this point was a man called Giovanni Giolitti, who was a conservative and disliked the growing power of the socialists, but also was concerned about the fascists. He decided to call a new election to Italy's parliament, the House of Deputies, where he would form a broad coalition which would include Mussolini and his fascists. The idea was that giving Mussolini a legitimate position in government would make him act in a more respectable manner and kill off the fascist movement. The idea was a bad one. Giolitti actually lost seats during this election and the socialists gained them, sort of. Some of the seats were gained by the newly formed Communist Party, created by a certain Antonio Gramsci. As a result, passing legislation was much more difficult, and the fascists now had friends in high places. In late 1921, the fascists decided to become a formal political party, the National Fascist Party, the PNF. Mussolini wanted to enter government via peaceful means, but the party's members wanted him to take power now. On October the 28th, 1922, the fascists conducted their infamous March on Rome, whereby tens of thousands of black shirts marched on Rome. Mussolini wasn't there himself though. He was in Milan, ready to flee to Switzerland if it all went wrong. Victor Emmanuel III was asked to sign an order allowing the army to open fire on the black shirts. The king, for reasons unknown, did not, and the next day he made Mussolini the Prime Minister. So the proportional representation system used in Italian elections meant that no party ever won majority. Mussolini, along with many others, sought to change this, and a man called Giacomo Acerbo put forward a law known as the Acerbo Law, which meant that the winning party in any future elections would get a clear majority of seats. This law was supported by most parties for two reasons. The first was that everyone hated the current electoral system since it made weak governments. The second, and arguably main reason they supported the law, was the armed black shirts who were in the room with them. Another election was held in 1924, with Mussolini and the Fascist Party standing for the first time at the head of a right-wing coalition. They won about 65% of the vote, and there's a lot of debate as to how clean the elections were. There was certainly violence against Mussolini's opponents, but he was also very popular, and many Italians were hoping he would fix the country's problems. The head of the socialist opposition, Giacomo Matteotti, spoke out against Mussolini's victory, saying it was tainted by the violence inflicted by his followers. Shortly after this, Matteotti was kidnapped and murdered by fascist black shirts. The murder of Matteotti forced many of Mussolini's coalition partners to abandon him. It looked like his grip on power was slipping. The fascist membership wanted Mussolini to be more extreme and hostile to his coalition partners, whereas Mussolini didn't want to lose more support in the Chamber of Deputies, which was becoming more and more difficult since he was directly implicated in Matteotti's murder. As such, he took a major risk. On January the 3rd, 1925, Mussolini walked into the Chamber of Deputies and dared anyone to remove him. Nobody did. This is seen as the end of liberal Italy and the beginnings of fascist Italy, but the difference wasn't immediate, and in many ways there was little difference at all. Conservatives and liberals were still being appointed to positions of authority. That said, Mussolini did become a dictator. In late 1925, he went from being the Prime Minister of Italy to being the head of the government, although he's better known by his other title, Il Duce, the leader. The next year, after a few assassination attempts, he banned all opposition parties, had Gramsci arrested and enacted strict press censorship. The new regime began a fierce propaganda campaign and sought to present Mussolini as an unassailable leader in the same vein as the old Roman emperors. Mussolini's first goal was to fix Italy's ailing economy. He sought to increase the levels of industrialisation across Italy, which were far behind the other great powers. Mussolini also sought to win several economic battles to secure Italy's position as a leading nation, the two most important being the battle for grain and the battle for the lira. The battle for grain was designed to make Italy self-sufficient in grain production. The battle for the lira was meant to make the lira more valuable as an international currency, which would make importing certain resources of which Italy lacked more feasible. Mussolini also made an agreement with Pope Pius XI to settle the Roman question. The Pope didn't recognise Italian sovereignty over him, and Mussolini cut him a deal. We'll give you some money, you'll stop openly criticising fascism, and the Vatican will gain its independence. They agreed, and in 1929 the Vatican City became the world's smallest independent country. Furthermore, Mussolini's government encouraged people to take up sports and also urged women to have more children. All of the aforementioned changes largely didn't work and made life worse for many Italians, but it was seen as their duty to endure for the sake of Italy. Their endurance would ideally see Italy recapture its old glory from the days of the Roman Empire. Mussolini had promised the Italian people that he would rebuild the Roman Empire for them, which is why he had ambitions on all of these countries. To the north lay Austria, who everyone knew that Germany under a certain Adolf Hitler wanted to annex. In 1935, Mussolini signed a treaty with France and Britain known as the Stresa Front, which guaranteed Austrian independence. You see, Mussolini didn't really like the Nazi regime in Germany, and the whole German master race thing made him uncomfortable because he, wasn't a German. The Stresa Front fell apart when Italy invaded Abyssinia, nowadays called Ethiopia, which was conquered by 1937. Mussolini also sent volunteers to fight in the Spanish Civil War, and in this conflict and the previous, Hitler had given Italy Germany support and relations between the two countries improved. Mussolini now felt that Britain and France's time had come and gone, and that Europe would now revolve around the Rome-Berlin axis, hence where the Axis powers get their name. Italy and Germany continued their united front over the coming years. In 1938, Italy sided with Germany over the annexation of Austria and its later dismemberment of Czechoslovakia. Germany sided with Italy in 1939 when it sent an ultimatum to King Zog of Albania to accept Italian overlordship. He refused, but there was nothing that Albania could do, and so, annexation. In May of 1939, Italy and Germany signed the Pact of Steel, an alliance in which both countries promised to help the other out in the event of war. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland, and suddenly, World War II. Mussolini wouldn't bring Italy into the war until mid-1940, after the fall of Paris. In the October of 1940, Mussolini came up with a brilliant idea. Let's invade Greece. This was, to put it mildly, a complete disaster, and Italian troops were trounced by the Greeks, which forced the Germans to come down and bail them out. And over the next couple of years, things got much worse. The tide of the war turned against the Axis powers. Italy lost its colonies in East Africa, lost many troops aiding with the invasion of the Soviet Union, and, after the Battle of El Alamein, lost its Libyan colony in mid-1943. Sicily, then Italy proper, was invaded shortly after this, and in September 1943, Mussolini was deposed and arrested. Germany then occupied the north of Italy and set up a puppet state, the Italian Social Republic, which was led by Mussolini because he managed to escape. The rest of Italy, under Victor Emmanuel III, joined the Allies and declared war on Germany. The Italian Social Republic was plagued by issues of partisans, Italians who resisted Mussolini's rule, and they did a great deal of damage to its war effort. By April 1945, the front lines looked like this, and on the 25th of that month, the Republic collapsed. 2 days later, Mussolini was captured by partisans and shot the next day. The war, and Fascist Italy, was over. In the aftermath of Fascist Italy, not much changed. The same liberals and conservatives who had been given power by Mussolini retained it after the war. Of course, Italy did see a return to democracy, and in 1946 it held a referendum on the monarchy's existence. Victor Emmanuel had abdicated on behalf of his son, Umberto II, to make the monarchy more appealing, but the Italian people voted to abolish the monarchy in 1946. And thus, the Republic of Italy was born. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and thank you for watching.
Section 7, Italian Republic. In 1955, in an effort to integrate into Western institutions, Italy joined the UN. And in 1960, they held the Rome Olympics. If we look at the Olympics logo, we can see that they use Roman numerals, and at the top we see a wolf feeding two children, which symbolize the wolf that raised Romulus and Remus. In 2002, Italy joined the euro, replacing the lira. Here we have a map of the three countries that we're looking at today. In orange, we see Italy, and then if you look at those two small dots inside of Italy, we see Vatican City and San Marino. This just shows how small they actually are. Now, if we look at our snapshot, it's obvious that Italy has the largest size, population, and GDP, but San Marino, which is one of the developed countries in the world, and it's also a European tax haven, has the highest GDP per capita. Vatican City. So, in the video, it explained a little bit of how Vatican City was created, but here's a little bit of some background. So, the Papal States used to be an independent country, but then they were conquered by the Kingdom of Italy, leading to the Pope, who in no way recognized Italy's independence, to have to seek refuge inside St. Peter's Basilica, and this was in 1870. And then, which the video did say, in 1929, Benito Mussolini negotiated an agreement where the land of the Vatican was given to the Pope, in exchange for the recognition of Italy's independence, and also for the Pope to stay out of politics, because he openly disagreed with fascism. And to understand the Vatican City, there are four key entities that you have to know. Two people and two different governments. So the first we have the Pope, who's the Bishop of Rome, and he occupies a throne called the Holy See, which is also the governing body of the Catholic Church. But then we have the unheard of King of Vatican City, who is actually the same exact person as the Pope, and he hands duties to different advisors. And those advisors handle the government as part of the Vatican City, which is a sovereign state that manages the government. And this makes the Vatican the only elected non-hereditary monarchy, which means that whenever a pope dies, there's an election between all the cardinals, but that cardinal that wins, that person gets all the power. San Marino, the fifth smallest country, is a beautiful country to learn about. Let's watch this quick clip about it.
Hello everyone and welcome to... This is Europe and here's San Marino. Now let's go, shall we? The fifth smallest country in the world, San Marino sits entirely within Italy. Why is this microstate independent and not part of the nation Italy? Let's find out. Since it's part of the Italian peninsula, San Marino was naturally in the Roman Empire, though it wasn't called San Marino yet. During the reign of Emperor Diocletian, the mountain that dominates the country, Monte Titano, became the refuge of a stonemason called Marino. He was a Christian fleeing Diocletian's persecution, the last and biggest of Rome's anti-Christian pogroms. The traditional date given for Marinus' settling upon the mountain is 301 AD. The community that incrementally grew upon the mountain after this is believed to be the genesis of the country of San Marino, which of course is named after Marinus. And so the centuries slipped by, and San Marino in late medieval times saw a number of surrounding districts join it, thus forming its current boundaries. It managed to hold on to its independence despite other bigger states wishing to attain it. Renaissance Italy produced unmatched works of artistic brilliance, but it was also a violent age, and one of its chief violent men was Cesare Borgia, who invaded San Marino in 1503. Thankfully, the occupation lasted only a few months. It was 40 years before another force attempted to conquer the state, but it failed after the troops lost their way in a thick fog. The following century saw this cardinal and his wig invade and occupy the country, but again only for a short time, as the Pope ensured San Marino's independence. When Napoleon invaded Italy, he respected the sovereignty of San Marino, admiring their staunchly independent attitude. He exempted San Marino from taxation and gave them 1,000 kilograms of wheat. Having survived conquerors from near and far, San Marino managed even to survive the 19th century's unification of Italy, in which the various Italian states were consolidated into a single kingdom. But not San Marino. This stoutly stubborn little state stood for its independence and maintained it. In 1906, the country adopted democratic government, and in World War I it remained neutral, and in World War II it remained neutral, though it was bombed by the British, who thought the Germans were there when they were not. Sorry, mate. But then they were. Yes, the Germans did in fact occupy it later on, and then the British and Indians liberated the country in this 1944 battle. San Marino today has a very high level of human development and is one of the richest countries in the world, with an economy sustained by banking and tourism. So that's it for San Marino, and that's all from me for now. Bye-bye!
Rob Armstrong asked, please tell us some fun facts. Well, did you know the last king of Italy only ruled for 36 days? Tourists throw over €1 million into the Trevi Fountain each year, and that Italy is the 5th most visited country in the world. And did you also know that out of the approximately 800 people living in Vatican City, only about 500 of them are actually citizens because they have to be employed by the Catholic Church, making the Swiss Guard, cardinals, and other religious figures the only citizens. And there's also a big difference between northern and southern Italy, as northern Italy's economy is more developed and industrialized, but southern Italy's economy is more reliant on agriculture and has a lot of less development. As we can see, that they have less foreign residents and higher unemployment. Rob Armstrong asks, I'm planning to visit Italy and the Vatican City. What sites should I see? Well, Rob, obviously, if you're in Rome, you have to see the Colosseum. If you're in Pisa, the Leaning Tower of Pisa, or if you're in the Vatican, St. Peter's Basilica or the Sistine Chapel. How do you say butterfly? In Italy, it's farfalla, and in Latin, it's papilio. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Well done.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
That was very good, Marino.
Thank you.